Hi everybody, it's Maya Zahira with Psychic Protection Sanctuary, and we are now live in our Spiritual Empowerment Community Facebook group. That's one of my free Facebook groups. So if you're watching the replay, shout out to you because at the beginning of the video there's nobody here live yet, or there's people joining, but I just want to send a special shout out to the people who are watching the replay on Facebook or YouTube. And if you want to join us live in the future, we are in the Spiritual Empowerment Community Facebook group, and it's a free group, so come and join us. We have a Facebook Live every third Tuesday evening. So our topic for today is conscious communication. The longer title is Conscious Communication in Challenging Times, but we can use conscious communication anytime, okay? I do acknowledge the air conditioner is pretty loud. I hope it's not too loud for you guys, but I live in Tucson, Arizona, and I think it's like 108 today, something like that. So we're just going to deal with some blowing sounds and everybody will survive. And I'm not going to turn the air conditioner off. I thought about it, but decided not to. So as always, we have two goals for this Facebook Live. The first goal is education, learning about whatever topic is at hand today. That's conscious communication. If you really want to get the most out of this, grab a pen and paper. I've been a teacher for over, 30 plus years in a variety of ways, and I'm very pro taking notes because I know that it's really easy to listen to stuff and just kind of forget it. So, but if you're not in a space where you can take notes, I would love for you to still stay here. You'll still get something from this. Our number two reason for being here, our number two goal for this video is deepening relationships, creating relationships with people in this free Facebook group. So with that said, those of you who are joining live, go ahead and say hi and where you're joining from. And those of you who are watching the replay, thank you so much for your patience as we take care of this important aspect of relationship building. And I'll be asking questions. We'll be doing a little bit of sharing as well. And that's just as important as the content for us members, we members of the Spiritual Empowerment Community. So we have several people here. I'm going to go ahead and jump into announcements. Let's just get that over with first. And then I have 2 pages of notes on all sorts of aspects of conscious communication. First, starting off talking about like what actually is, what am I referring to with conscious communication. So we do have one person saying hi. Everybody else is being silent. That's okay. I'm just glad that you're here. Shelly is saying hello from Tucson. Hey, Shelly. I've actually been wanting to reach out and message you. I've been too busy. But I will actually have time coming up here soon. So I'll be sending you a message, Shelly, just to say hi. Okay. Oh, we've got Jennifer. Hello, Maya from Overland Park, Kansas. Hello there. So as we're doing shout outs and everybody's joining, I'm going to just get some quick announcements out of the way. And I know not everybody loves the announcements, but I really feel strongly that I would be remiss if I didn't go over this stuff, because there are always some people who are joining live or watching the replay who want to know how to find more and need more and are seeking more, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell you where to find more. So if you're interested in working with me or learning about my programs, etc., I recommend that you start by going to my website, which is www.psychicprotectionsanctuary.com, and you'll be able to see all about what I do and how to sign up for a program, how to work with me, etc. So the main thing that I do is I help people manage their energy. Like, that's the broad sense of what I do. I help people manage their energy. I help people develop their discernment so they can know what's what in order to manage their energy. So that includes like teaching people psychic development, how to develop your intuitive senses, how to develop your discernment. And I also help people who are experiencing like really major energy issues like unwanted paranormal activity and all of that stuff. So you'll see that if you go to my website. Just to finish out announcements, one more little tidbit is that I do have an online program that's called Spiritual Empowerment Academy, and there is so much awesome sauce in that program. I'm not going to spend time explaining what it is. If you just feel intrigued by the energy of just my energy and the energy of what I'm teaching today, then follow that nudge and just go to psychicprotectionsanctuary.com. Under the events tab, click on Spiritual Empowerment Academy, and you can read all about it. Okay, done with announcements. I do want to just remind everybody, again, we do have a Facebook Live in this free group, Spiritual Empowerment Community, every third Tuesday, and depending on your time zone. So for me, right now I'm in Pacific time zone, that's 4 p.m., and people in Central time zone, it's 6 p.m., and it's the third Tuesday monthly. That's when we are doing it right now. So it's very predictable. I try to keep it on a predictable schedule. Less is more for me. Like I was trying to do free Facebook Live classes every week. I'm doing so many things, I don't have time. So once a month, I give this free gift to you guys. Hamad says, hello, Maya from the Middle East. Awesome. And another hello to all of you who are silently watching. Good to see you. Okay, so again, today's topic is conscious communication. I am going to need to look at my notes several times today because I have all sorts of different odds and ends that I'm going to be covering with you, and I want to make sure that I don't forget anything. You could also call this class Conscious Communication in Challenging Times, because right now, as we're recording this, we're in the middle of COVID-19 situation. This is August 2020, and there's also a lot going on globally. There's a lot going on in the political climate. There's a lot going on in terms of social justice. There's a lot going on the planet, and a lot of really important things, and also a lot of things that are really triggering to people too. So it's a time when we need to be even more aware of communicating, speaking, and listening in a very conscious way. So it was, I think, a couple of weeks ago when some people in this free Facebook group requested this topic of, I don't think they called it conscious communication, but just understanding how to communicate, during these challenging situations. And the term that I use for it is conscious communication. But anyway, it was requested a couple of weeks ago, and I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, I think this is the right timing. I think this is what we need, right? This is what we all need. But what's so funny and ironic in a good way is that whenever I set forth to teach something or offer something or whatever, the universe has this way of presenting extra practice for me or situations, and I'm just thinking of how to explain this, but it's this thing that happens. Like, for example, 5 years ago, I had this program that I was offering, and right when I was getting to the segment to teach some in-depth information about psychic protection, the universe presented me with like a really major situation regarding psychic protection, and it was like a really jarring situation, and it was not funny at the time, but now it's funny because I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that happened like that was a teachable moment from the universe. And so that does happen to me a lot. I don't know if that happens to you guys, but it happens to me a lot. So literally in the last week, I had some like really challenging and sometimes remarkable communication situations. So I want to make it clear that I'm not teaching this topic because of those situations. It's the other way around. It's that though I really believe those situations happened because I was planning to teach this this topic. So I'm going to talk about what is conscious conversation. I'm going to define it for you. But before I do, I want to talk about how even as we are really putting forth our best effort, like trying our best to communicate and to interact in a loving way, I want you and all of us to think of this as a practice. Because I'm going to tell you, you're not going to always get it right. And sometimes you're going to feel like you really messed up, or that was sort of okay, but it was kind of messy and you could have done better. And I will raise my hand on that one. I feel like I've been working on conscious communication for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, I don't know, long time. Learning how to get clear, how to set boundaries, how to ground, how to communicate, how to listen. And there are a lot of times when I get it right. And remember I said I've been a teacher for a long time, so sometimes I'm like, A+, that was great. And then there are other times when I'm like, yeah, maybe that was kind of a D-. Like it wasn't a total failing grade, but it was like not really, it was a little bit messy, and I'm going to take mental notes on how to do it better. But there are just some days when you'll be able to do better than other days. And I'm going to talk about that as we go through all of our information later. I'm going to talk about why that is. I do feel like there was a situation over the weekend when, even though I was not at my best, I had a situation last week and a situation last weekend. Both situations, I was super, super tired. Like, it was not a time that I would have chosen to schedule a conscious conversation. I was like really depleted, really tired. Not a lot of mental space or emotional space left because I'd been working a lot, and both times were when I was off work. And the situation last week, I wasn't as aware when it was happening. I wasn't as aware from the start what exactly was happening until hindsight. But in the situation over the weekend, we ended up having a beautiful clearing conversation where we were able to talk about some difficult things. And one of the differences, so both situations I was not at my best, but the situation over the weekend was successful. I was thinking about this before getting on here. I think part of it is that the difference was that even though I was super tired and didn't have very many brain cells left to engage in a difficult conversation, the other person was truly interested in listening and understanding, and both of us were able to meet on that level, whereas the situation earlier in the week, the people that I was engaging with, even though some of them were kind and friendly, the intent was more to convince me of something rather than to just simply listen and understand one another. So again, I think there were people who were coming from a good place, but the intent was different. So even though both times I was beyond tired, both times, the more recent situation it turned out to be this beautiful healing conversation. And I think it's because the intent was different And so we were able to deepen our relationship actually, rather than for things to get messy and then me have to block people. So it's an interesting observation, right? Now I'm going to get into what is a conscious conversation. And then I have a whole bunch of random thoughts to share with all of you. Like I said, I am not an expert. Well, I don't think anyone on the planet is really an expert. Like, no one is perfect and, and has perfect days all the time. But these are the things that I've been practicing over the years. So next to our definition, but I see we have a comment. Shelley says, this exactly what I'm dealing with now. Super messy and taking notes. Oh, Shelley. Yeah, I forgot. I think you were one of the people that requested this. That's right. Yeah, so hopefully some of the things that I share will be helpful. I think one of the most important things, and that's why I covered it like first and foremost, the first and foremost is to remember that this is a practice, and it's like any spiritual practice or exercise practice, fitness, whatever. If you're a fitness person and like you are timing yourself, sometimes you go faster one day, sometimes not as well the other day because you're tired or whatever. So I think we need to all, no matter what's happening, even if things get messy, because let's face it, like on this planet, things get messy sometimes, even with the best intentions. So we have to give ourselves grace and give the other person grace too. Even if we have to set a boundary or block somebody, we give ourselves grace, we give them grace. We're like, whoops, that didn't exactly go in a smooth way. But we give ourselves grace and understanding because we're not always going to get it perfect. So what do I think conscious communication is, or conscious conversation? This is a term that I use. Conscious just simply means aware, right? You're not just blabbing things. And I've been in relationships in the past with people who were not very aware. When they would communicate stuff, they would just like blah, 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 just say stuff. And sometimes it was not very conscious, not very aware, and sometimes very hurtful. So with conscious conversation, we're doing our very best to think about what it is that we're saying and to be grounded. That's a big thing, to try to be really grounded and anchored. Conscious communication is respectful. Even if we don't agree on everything, there's respect. So it's also about listening to understand rather than conversation in order to convince someone or argue with someone. Also, I see a lot of conversations online, like on Facebook. I'm on Facebook a lot, like people talking in different Facebook threads where it's clear that it's not a conscious conversation because the intent looks like the person is just trying to win an argument, not to listen and understand the other person's point of view. So conscious conversation is grounded, respectful, centered. You're listening to understand. And when you are speaking, you're speaking your truth, but in a grounded way, not in an aggressive way. And, you know, the intention with conscious communication is to resolve the issue, or maybe the issue can't be resolved, but to understand one another and then to just leave it be. So sometimes the situation can't be resolved, but then in a conscious conversation, you can agree to disagree, honor one another's boundaries, honor the fact that you each have different opinions, and then let it go in a friendly, respectful, amicable way, right? Hamad says, it is a struggle, especially when someone is highly sensitive. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too, the sensitive part. So these are really difficult times right now, so it's especially important to do our best to communicate consciously. But these ideas apply all the time. So not just during COVID-19. The tips that I'm going to give you are random. They're not in any particular order. I just wrote them down in my notebook, hoping to create an order that made the most sense. So the first thing that I wrote down, I'm going to read this question first. Shelley says, how do you relate the truth when it's hard and cutting? I think I'm going to be answering your question in more of a holistic way as I go through all of these tips. But if it doesn't get answered, we can revisit it or see if you can ask it a different way. Okay. All right. Hi, Nora. Good to see you. All right. Looking at my notes, I wrote down, so I started off my notes by writing this quote down that I saw on social media. And it says, you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And that's so important. Social media is crazy right now, but we're not just talking about social media. We're talking about in person and phone and text, all communication. But you don't have to attend every argument that someone is pulling you into. So you can consciously practice not getting sucked in. I choose my battles all the time. I scroll past stuff all the time where I'm like, nope, I'm not going to even say what I'm thinking there because it's going to start an argument. And maybe on another day, I might want to engage about that. But on another day, hey, I've just worked for 10 hours. I really enjoy my work. But after that, I don't want to spend a bunch of brain cells or utilize a bunch of emotional energy trying to convince someone of my point of view when I'm done working 10 hours. I want to just relax. And so a lot of times I will just scroll on by, I don't need to have that argument. But I also want to talk about the flip side of this. So I'm going to change this quote and say, instead of argument, I'm going to say, you don't have to attend every conversation you're invited to. So there have been situations, even recently, when people have tried to have a conversation with me about something, and in hindsight, I realize, for various reasons, that actually, I didn't really need to have that conversation. And it wasn't an argument. It wasn't the people weren't being argumentative, but it was conversations that in hindsight I realized, it was just not helpful at all. So I want you to think in terms of consent when you are trying to have a conversation with someone. It doesn't matter if it's online, in person, if it's with your spouse, best friend, whatever. I want you to think when you're trying to have a conversation, especially a difficult conversation, and you're trying to be respectful, but you need to remember about consent. Maybe the person isn't in a space where they're interested in talking about it. Maybe they don't want to give their consent. And here's the harsh truth. If someone else doesn't want to agree to have a conversation with you about something, that's their free will. Consent, free will. And it's true for you too. If someone is trying to have a conversation with you and you're like, you know what, I'm really not interested in talking to them about this, but I think we feel obligated, we have to explain, we have to have a conversation. You don't owe anyone anything. If it's not something you want to have a conversation about, you don't have to give your consent, and you can set a boundary. Now, I'm all for communicating and not putting up walls, but I just want to point out that you are not required to attend every conversation that is presented to you. That's not a requirement. It's up to you to decide what conversations you are going to attend and which ones just don't feel important, or that you are not interested in taking part in, or maybe it's just not the right time. I really can't talk about this right now I'm not in the right space. I'm really tired. Can we talk about this tomorrow? And I've been one to utilize that one. I've used that a lot in a lot of my conversations, especially with romantic partners where you're very close. It's not just like an acquaintance. There have been times when we're talking about like an important subject comes up. I recognize it does need to be talked about. If we're going to be able to keep going with this relationship, we need to talk about this, but I'm not in a space to do that right now. So I set a boundary. I really can't talk about that right now. You can explain why, but you don't have to. You can just say, now's not a good time. Or you can say, I don't have the emotional bandwidth for that right now, but it's important, so can we talk about it tomorrow? So you can schedule a time. Now, if they don't honor your boundaries, then that's an issue, and we're going to talk about boundaries later. But the point is, you don't have to attend every conversation, and it's not up to you. There is kind of a pattern that I see a lot in the spiritual world, and it's this I don't know if we've all thought of it in such clarity, but it's this feeling like we do need to attend every conversation because we're trying to be good, we're trying to be ultra spiritual and ultra conscious, so we have this distortion that we think we have to be there for all of it, and we don't. I'm going to touch on this a little more in depth later. Okay. Okay, looking at my notes. Okay, next important tidbit. Just remember, I'm kind of skipping around because there's a lot of different little valuable tidbits. So the next tidbit is be brave enough to ask questions. And one thing that I think we do so often is we make assumptions about what somebody means or where they're coming from or whatever. Even if we don't on a conscious level think I'm making an assumption. Like, it's not usually that conscious, but we do it. And so be brave enough to ask questions. Like, it sounds like you were saying blah, blah, blah. Is that what you really meant? Actually, that's a good one. If you're taking notes, write this down. It sounds like you're saying blah, blah, blah. Is that what you really meant? Or just ask any question. Can you clarify that? I'm not sure that I understand what you mean. Can you clarify that? So, for example, if it's a situation where you feel like somebody was saying something to purposely insult you, and you're like, oh my gosh, they just are being so rude. They just insulted me. So it's going to take some bravery, but you could say, it sounds like you're saying that you don't support this important life decision that I'm making. Is that what you really mean? Right? So you don't have to be aggressive about it. Like, it sounds like you're being an asshole. Like, you don't have to say that. That's not helpful, right? But you can kind of mirror back what you think they're saying and see if it's correct. I'm going to talk in a little while about something that I call pain filters. But because there's so many tips, I want to kind of stay on track with this. But the idea being, sometimes when we hear something or we see something, we've put it through our own filters, and sometimes it gets distorted, and we don't have the whole picture sometimes. So number one, you don't always have the whole picture. Number two, sometimes you can misunderstand because you're running it through your own views, your own past hurts, your own past traumas, your own past relationships that had, if somebody said such and such, they were intending to be hurtful. So now if someone else says that to you, it goes through your pain filter. You think that they're trying to be hurtful when they have no idea that's a trigger for you. So back to be brave enough to ask questions. It does take bravery to do this. I tend to definitely ask questions if it's someone that I don't know very well, if they're a new friend, and of course I live in a new city. I moved here less than a year ago, and so there are times when I'm like, I barely know this person, and I'm really wanting to listen, and I'm desiring to understand, but I don't fully understand because I don't know them that well. So I don't know everything. I don't know, like, I can't make assumptions about how they're responding because I just don't know them. And so I will ask questions. Now, there have been a few times when that has not been received in a very friendly way. What I have not observed this until recently, in the last few months, when everybody's been shaken to the core, really, with the COVID-19 situation and all of the issues. I'm not going to list them. You know what they are. That has really shaken up people's inner core, feelings of safety. Root chakra issues have really gotten shaken up. And I've never had an issue with asking people questions before. I will ask a question, and then it's beautiful because then we avoid having a misunderstanding because we've been conscious enough to ask questions. But right now is an extra challenging time for any kind of communication because everybody's so triggered and everybody's pain body is so ouchy right now that there are instances where I've asked someone a reasonable question, and then how it's received is, I think, in a very defensive way. Like, how come you don't know that about me? You should know that about me. Now I'm going to just also interject something that during these extra challenging times, so globally these are challenging times, but even when this current cycle is over, there are going to be times when individuals are experiencing a really challenging time, or they're not at their best. Maybe they're not feeling well, they're under a lot of stress, they're scared about their work or their business, all these different things. It's important to give people grace. So yes, we need to set boundaries and we need to not be a doormat, but I think now more than ever we need to just allow people grace. So like in that situation where I asked a question and I don't think that went over very well at all. It seemed to have upset the person, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to make too many assumptions on that. But what I came to was, I don't know exactly what all was going on there. Asking questions doesn't seem to work in that situation right now. So I'm just giving that person space and grace. Okay? We're going to talk later about when you try to engage in conscious conversation, is the person able to meet you at that level or not? Okay? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. All right, so we talked about be brave enough to ask questions, and then this reminded me of the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I've had a copy of his book for forever, but since I've moved, I think I may have given it to one of my students because I was living in an RV for a short time and I got rid of almost all my books. So I'll just talk about it. It's The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. A lot of spiritual seekers have heard of this book. It's been around for many years. It's this little book that's packed full of wisdom. And I'm going to remind you what these 4 agreements are, not in any particular order. The first one is be impeccable with your word. So that means, not gossiping, not telling untruths, not name calling, saying things that are mean, saying things that are disruptive, like on purpose, saying things that are disruptive. So be as conscious and impeccable and high integrity with how you use your words. Another one is always do your best. And I love this one because what he explains is that some days your best is different than other days. Some days you're tired, some days you're not feeling well, some days you're stressed. And on those days, your best might not be at the same level as other days, but you still have the expectation that you're doing the best that you can all the time. Another of the 4 agreements is don't make assumptions. And I love this one. In fact, I wonder if this quality that I have of asking questions, I'm wondering if maybe that I possibly got that from reading this book 25 years ago or whenever that was. I'm not sure, but I think that could be the case. So don't make assumptions about a person or a situation. Be brave enough to ask questions. And even those of us who are empaths and who have developed our psychic abilities, you don't know everything. I don't know everything. So even if you're picking up on stuff empathically or in some other way, still don't make assumptions. You can still ask questions. And I think that's a wonderful habit. That's probably one of the top things on my list of conscious communication. Ask clarifying questions. Okay? And the last one on the list is don't take anything personally. This is from the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Now, I do want to tell you up front that don't take anything personally. That one, so I used to love all of the agreements, and when I read it 25 years ago, over the years, like the last 10 plus years, I've started to get really annoyed with the don't take anything personally, because one thing that sometimes happens in the spiritual world is that sometimes we'll take a concept and then either misapply it or over-apply it or make it really dogmatic. And I've seen a lot of misapplication of the don't take anything personally. So I'm going to talk about that for a second. Give me a second here. Okay. Don't take anything personally. What I've seen people do is take this and use it as a way to deflect responsibility for what they're really doing. So let's say somebody says something really mean or does something really terrible, and then the other person tries to have a conscious conversation with them about it and says, I want to talk about that thing that happened, and it really hurt me, or whatever it is that they're trying to say. And person A says, well, Don Miguel Ruiz says, don't take anything personally. It's not about you. And so what the person did was they deflected. They just bounced off any responsibility for their own actions. So that's where I see that that important agreement being misapplied. So we need to affirm that people are responsible for what they say and what they do. You are responsible for what you say and what you do. But if you're on the receiving end of something hurtful, here's the balance that I've found. If you're on the receiving end of something hurtful, you can say, yes, that person is responsible for what they've said or done. But what is simultaneously true is that it's not a reflection of who I am. So if someone says, you're a stupid idiot, okay, that's on them. That is about them. That's about them. That's whatever hurt or stressed out or whatever is making them say that. That's about them. And yes, you are a real human being, so sometimes those things hurt. So we need to acknowledge that. But we also need to acknowledge it's not about us. It's about the other person. So those of us who grew up in environments where there was a lot of hurtful dynamics and dysfunctional kinds of situations. When people are communicating with us in an unconscious way and saying insults and saying hurtful, unsupportive things, it can tend to hit us like daggers, especially if you're an empath and you feel like all that stuff just hits you like daggers, and it does feel personal. But it's important to remember, it's not about you, it's about that other person, okay? So when we're trying to have a conscious conversation and the other person is not coming from consciousness and they're being hurtful, do give yourself grace, give yourself love and loving compassion when those energy daggers do pierce through your energy field, because you're still working on getting stronger. Give yourself grace over that, but then work on trying to remember that that's about them. Whatever they've said is not even a reflection of me, okay? So those are the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Don't make assumptions. Be brave enough to ask questions. Always do your best, whatever that may be from day to day. And don't take anything personally. What other people say and do is about them and not about you. And you know how I apply the don't take anything personally? I really do believe that, like, the things that people say and do is about them. So even when someone compliments me, like, wow, you're so wonderful, you're so blah, blah, blah. Like, I do receive it. I'm like, well, thank you. That was very kind. But I know that what they're saying is a reflection of, like, they're seeing in me what's already in them. So really, whether it's positive or negative, whatever someone is doing or saying, it's a reflection of what's within them. Okay. Yeah, Shelley says spiritual bypassing used as a defense. Yeah, I didn't have spiritual bypassing in my notes, but I use that phrase all the time. And that's when we use spiritual concepts, spiritual practices, spiritual ideas as a way to avoid our real grounded human experience. And some of those things can be like deflecting, the deflection thing that I was talking about earlier. All right, so jumping on to the next thing. Here's a quote. Some of you may know where this comes from. And in fact, I came across it in a book recently, and I'm sure they said where it came from, and I don't know. So it came from somewhere, so it did not come from me. And I've put it in my own words. I don't think this is exactly the exact wording, but it's something about, before you say something, let it pass through these 3 doors. Is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? I may have switched those around, I don't know. But all 3 of those questions are valid. Is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? Now, I'll give a little caveat for the is it kind. Sometimes, even those of us who are spiritual seekers who want to be kind all the time, sometimes we need to communicate, and it needs to on purpose not be kind. Sometimes we need to set a firm boundary. Like take, for example, some of the social justice issues in the world today. Being all kind and sweet is not necessarily what's going to work. Sometimes we need to be taking on the warrior archetype. But we can also ask, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it helpful? And I don't think helpful is in the original quote, but I think that's an important question. Is this helpful? Is saying this, like, it might be true. Like a good example is, like, you know, somebody got their hair cut and you're like, oh my God, that's the worst haircut ever. Like you don't like it. But what I would say is, who cares? You're not the one wearing it, right? Like, if the other person feels happy, then that's all that matters. But is it true that like you don't like their haircut? So you say, oh, that's a terrible haircut. Well, it's not kind and it's really not necessary to say that to them, right? I think that's a pretty obvious example. But there's some people who like wear honesty and authenticity like a badge, like I'm totally honest, brutally honest. Well, it's not always helpful. It's not always helpful when you go to that extreme. So you can be honest and true and upfront, but if what you're saying is not necessary and it's going to cause unnecessary hurt, why say it? So let what you say pass through some doors of consciousness first before you speak it. Okay? I feel like everybody watching this, the kind of people who were drawn to watch this video, probably already know that part. So, I'm addicted to lip balm. If my lips get dry, I must have lip balm. I have to have it everywhere I go. Now you know something new about me. Okay, now, here's an important thing that I mentioned earlier, but we're going to go into this. Is the person able to meet you at your level? Now, I'm not implying that any of us are holier than thou and we're like at this high level and like these other people aren't able to meet us at this level. That's not what I mean. I just mean, so get rid of that. It's not a hierarchy. It's not a contest. But this is the best wording that I can come up with. Is the other person able to meet you at your level? Okay. So if you're trying to if you are attempting to have a conscious conversation and the other person is coming from a vantage point where they're trying to convince you to change your mind, or they're trying to win an argument, or they're trying to be right, they're not meeting you at your level. Okay? Now, and if you recognize that, like you might intuitively feel that when you very first start to engage, you're like, oh, I don't think this person is going to be able to meet me on this level that I'm trying to, like, I don't think they're going to be able to hear me. Intuitively, if you feel that, you can go ahead and just default to just saying, thank you for, so here's another nugget. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I'll give it consideration. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I'll give it consideration. Or you can shorten it to thank you for sharing. Actually, that phrase, I think the author and publisher Louise Hay used to use that one. Thank you for sharing. I got that from one of her books. But another one is just simply thank you. You don't have to explain that you agree or disagree. You don't have to get into a conversation with them. Maybe you're busy and you don't have time. Maybe it's not that they aren't meeting you at your level. Maybe you just are not interested, or you don't have time. Whatever, you can just say thank you. Okay, so I see some comments, but I think I was going to say something and I lost it. So, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about whether they're meeting you at your level. So I talked about how maybe their intent is to just argue and win an argument, right? Or maybe they are deflecting. So maybe you're saying something to them and they're just bouncing it right off, just like I gave in that example a minute ago. Like you try to say something to them and they're like, no, that's not me, that's you. Like, and they're so busy being in denial and just like mirroring, like holding a mirror up and being like, nope, it's all you, it's all you. So if they're doing that, or if they're being defensive, or if you can tell that they're taking their own issues and they're projecting them onto you, or they're just simply not listening. They're not listening. They're and this reminds me of the situation last week. Like, they just were not listening to understand. They were listening to convince, and that wasn't working. And I didn't realize that because it was my day off. I was in the middle of I was at the laundromat. Like, I literally was at the laundromat. I wasn't in a space where I was like all zen, like, let me respond in a conscious. I was just like, I'm trying to wash my underwear, like, I'm trying to, like, get stuff done on my day off. And so I didn't realize what was happening at the beginning, but in hindsight, it was like, oh, I now have the clarity that it wasn't an equal ground. It was, I'm trying to convince you to change your mind. And that wasn't working because, well, I'll talk about some other issues later. There's a reason why it wasn't working. And in hindsight, when I look back, I realize, oh, probably what would have been more appropriate is to say, thank you so much for sharing your important perspectives, because their perspectives actually were important. I really feel that way. And I'll give it consideration. And then that's it. What happened though was, since I wasn't fully, like, grounded, I was at the laundromat, right? I didn't realize I didn't realize what was happening. And in hindsight now, I think I could have just said thank you and let it go. Let's talk about pain filters too, before I get into comments. Hello, Kitty. She's quiet. I knew this. She's quiet all day until I get on and start teaching. I love it. So distracting, but adorable. Okay, we're going to talk about pain filters. Hi, are you okay? Come up and join us. All right. Pain filters happen with all of us. So this is not just like that person over there upset me, so they have pain filters. We all have this, but some people's pain filters are just a little more active than others, or they might be going through a period where it's more active. So what I call a pain filter is like, so as a clairvoyant, I can see energy fields, and it's like this layer in the auric field that's filled with all of their past hurts, all of the beliefs that they developed when they were younger, maybe beliefs that aren't really serving them, ways of interpreting the world that maybe are not serving them, but all these past hurts and all these interpretations, right? And so when you say something to that person, it goes, so those words energetically go towards them, but it goes through their pain filter, and sometimes it gets all distorted. So what you said and what they heard can be totally different things. And many years ago, I had a couple of relationships with people who had very active pain filters, we'll just say. Because you could say something really kind or really helpful, and it was obvious by their responses that what you said versus what they heard, what you said was something nice, kind, helpful. What they heard was something mean, because how they would respond was, how could you talk to me that way? How could you be so mean? How could you be so unsupportive? And my first thought would always be, what did they hear me say? Because I don't think they heard the same thing as what I said. And it was during those times that I started to understand this idea of the pain filter. So sometimes a person's pain filter is so activated that it's not that they're not a good person, it's that their pain filter is so active that you could make every attempt to have conscious, loving, honest communication with them, but they can't hear you. Okay? Hi! You're adorable, but super annoying right now. It's distracting. I'm not going to get up and go get her. Hey, no. No. Oh, that stopped it. Good. Maybe. Okay, so that's all about pain filters, and we have that happen with ourselves too. So that goes back to being brave enough to ask a question. Like, it sounds like you're saying blah blah blah. Is this what you really mean? That's how we can keep our own pain filter in check. Sometimes we receive something that we think is hurtful, and maybe it is hurtful, or maybe it isn't. Maybe it just got distorted when it came through our pain filter. Author Eckhart Tolle, he talks about the pain body. So I want to just give some credit to him, because he talks about something very similar. Although what I'm talking about, I think, is a little bit of a different interpretation. But in some of his books, he talks about the pain body, which is a similar idea, I think. So let's go through comment. Yeah. Okay, Jill says, but friends who lie to you when you have a terrible haircut are not helpful either. Okay, that's a great thing to... Okay, I'm going to go into this more. Great. I've seen so many people do that. I never say anything, but I'd never lie and say it looks good when it doesn't. I appreciate that you brought that up, Jill, because when I was pointing out, like, is it kind, is it helpful, is it necessary? So let's be super clear. That's not an invitation to lie to people. So when we lie to people, that creates all sorts of distortions. Even, I think, in mainstream society, it's considered acceptable to tell little white lies in order to preserve someone's feelings. I'm going to speak for myself as an empath. That drives me crazy, because as an empath, my little spidey senses are telling me something's off with what they're saying. And then what it ends up doing is it literally will destroy the friendship. It'll destroy the relationship, because I don't trust the person, because I can feel that they're not telling me the truth about things. I know we have some other people watching who are empaths. I am very pro honesty on a personal level, so I feel very strongly about it, probably because I have such a negative response to lies. They really mess up relationships for me. And I think, so that whole mainstream way of doing things, I can't operate in that at all. And nor should we. I don't think that should be the norm. I don't think telling those white lies to preserve people's feelings, I don't think that should be the norm at all. I don't think it's healthy. I think it's really dysfunctional. So I think that we can find ways to be kind and also honest. So if somebody shows up and they don't say anything about their haircut, then you don't have to say anything about their haircut either. You just say, how's your day going? It's really hot outside, isn't it? Let's go out for a cup of coffee, or like whatever. Or, hey, that's a cool shirt, because you really do like the shirt. So you point out something that you do like, right? I believe so much in honesty that if someone tells me point blank, if they ask me, so how do you like my haircut? I will say something that's true. I'll say, it looks nice and cool. I bet you're really comfortable. Like, let's say it's super short. It looks really cool. I bet you're really comfortable. Is it really comfortable for you now? Is it cooler? Yes, it is. I love it. That's great. Okay, so like that's how I do it. And hopefully you all can find a way that works for you, where you can be honest, and I know your intent is to be supportive, right? If we have friends that are telling lies, and that's not a match for us, and we're seeking to be in relationships with people who are able to meet us on our level with conscious communication, we might begin working with the universe to send us the next up level of people into our lives who are able to meet us on the level that we want to be at communication wise, which includes not lying and also not saying things that are cruel. Both, right? So for me, over the years, I've let go of a lot of people. And as I've done so, as I've up-leveled personally, eventually new people came in. And so now the only people in my close circle are people who communicate in a compatible way. So there's literally nobody in my close inner circle who lies. There's nobody. Maybe acquaintances, people I care about who are in my larger community. Sure, there's a variety of people. And I know we're not talking about up-leveling and filtering people, but that seems relevant right here, that as we're learning about conscious communication, we also need to think about what kind of people we are choosing in our lives, and sometimes it's time to call in the next better level of people. Okay, I love that you asked that question, Jill, because there might have been somebody else thinking the same thing, like, so what am I supposed to do if someone asks me a question point blank? Am I supposed to lie or to be kind? I'm supposed to be kind. How does that work? Super important. So we need to communicate with integrity and honesty. Jill says, my cat does that too when I start talking. Yeah, she did not used to do this, but several months ago, her kitty companion passed away. And so now there's a few behavior things that are happening in pretty much all of my recent videos. But I give her a lot of grace because she's been through a lot. And Jeannie says that's being fake. Yeah, when you lie to somebody, it is being fake, and that's not conscious communication. So there's a balance. There's being honest, there's being kind, there's not being cruel and not lying. So finding a way to speak the truth in a way that's helpful. Yeah. Nora says, I feel worn out by certain behaviors in people. Maybe it's my pain body. I have lost energy and patience for some people, and I'm losing interest in them. As I read the question and I'm tuning in, it feels like there's a lot going on there. It feels complicated. So sometimes I could tell you, oh no, it is your pain body, or no, it isn't, or it's all them, or it's all you. It feels like there's a lot going on. And let's see, what else do I want to say? So I would just affirm for you, don't put it all on you. I don't think that just blaming it all on your pain body. It feels more complex than that. But yes, you do want to take responsibility for your part. But I think there are, but other people have their parts too. So I think that's it. That's the message for you. Yeah. And it relates to something else I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. Jill says, agree. Thanks for clarifying. I can't stand those little white lies either. Oh my gosh. When I have gone on I know we're not talking necessarily about dating here, but when I go on my first couple of dates with somebody, I have to explain to them, I can't do, even just a few little lies. It totally messes me up bad. You cannot do that. You gotta just tell me. Okay, we have a few more things. Let's see where we are at. Okay, earlier I was talking about whether they can meet you at your level or not. And I forgot to pull it all together by saying this. If you've entered into a relationship, into a conversation, and at some point you realize, oh wait, we're not on the same wavelength with this. We're not speaking the same language, whether it's them meeting you at your level or you're just speaking such a different language. If you realize that way, if you realize that part way through and you didn't realize it at first, then a lot of times all you can do is just do your best to figure out how to exit the conversation. And you can do it with kindness and clarity and setting a clear boundary. But sometimes it can get messy because you've already been engaging, and then when you're like, oops, I don't think this is, like, I'm no longer interested in this, now I need to exit, it usually feels a little bit messy and looks a little bit messy. So just do your best with that. All right, so I mentioned at the very beginning how important it is to listen. So communication isn't just speaking in a conscious way, telling the truth, speaking with integrity, etc., but it's also listen and consider the other person's point of view. If it's a conversation that you are interested in and consenting to take part in, okay? So listen and consider what they're saying, but also stand your ground. So here's some random thoughts here. I see a tendency in spiritual seekers to people please. And I used to do this really bad. So that's why it's so easy for me to see it, because it resonates with a piece of me that I've healed. And I'll just start off in explaining this by giving my own example, that when someone would come to me with a concern, or maybe like they were upset about something, and so maybe it was an accusation, right? Whatever level of like intensity it may be, they would come to me with something, and automatically, literally as a reflex, boom, without even thinking it through, reflex, I would apologize, I would take full responsibility and affirm that I would completely change my actions in order to make them happy. And I would over apologize, and I would take responsibility for things that actually had nothing to do with me. I know this doesn't apply to everybody, but I feel like some of you watching this, you're going to have a huge aha moment. I learned to do that not only from my upbringing. I was raised Catholic, and there was this kind of emphasis on responding that way. But even once I expanded and was involved in the New Age communities, there was definitely an emphasis on this, that you take the higher ground, and there was kind of this like doormat phenomenon that was happening. And about 2 years ago, there were a string of situations that happened with acquaintances and colleagues and etc., where they would project something onto me, like you are so blah blah blah. And it actually, I am a conscientious person, so I still believe we need to think about it. Like, is any part of that true? We need to think about that. Is any part of that true? But I wouldn't even think that. I would just immediately be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I won't do it again. And I would take full responsibility, even if it wasn't true. So the universe sent me a string of these events so that I would see it, and I would see what was happening, and I would go, oh, this is a pattern that keeps happening, and it's like intensifying, and I'm being asked to work on it and clear it and get clarity. And I realized that I was taking on that doormat, that like codependent people pleaser kind of thing, where that's very common in healers. Actually, it's very common that we take responsibility for things that are not ours. And so I stopped doing that. And so going back to when you're having a conversation with someone, truly listen and consider what they're saying, but also stand your ground. So if the person is asking you to do something and it's something reasonable and you feel comfortable doing it, then go ahead. There's no need to be stubborn for stubborn's sake. But if you're standing your ground and they're asking you to do something or agree with a perspective, and you're being asked to cancel part of yourself out in order to please them, don't do it. Stand your ground. I've seen the phrase cancel culture going around lately, but it didn't really click what it really meant. But I do see a lot of people trying to cancel everybody. There's a lot of that, like, you said this thing, you can't say it anymore. And I think we need to listen and deeply consider, and then think about what our values are, and then stand our ground when it's important. So there's this balance. You can stand your ground, don't be a doormat, listen deeply, consider what's being said, but not one extreme or the other. I also think, as far as the codependency and the people pleasing, I think that is also really common in the spiritual world and with healers, where we take on the role that we remain present in a conversation because we think it's our responsibility to help the other person heal. So we're holding space for them. And I, based on my journey and where I am right now, I don't believe that it is every healer's responsibility to heal every person who comes their way, who is angry and spouting off who's like spewing all of their inner pain. It's not our responsibility. Okay, so that's something to think about. So when you're intending to have a conscious conversation with somebody, think about, at what level are you, like at what point is it for you that you bow out? Are you responsible for holding presence even for anybody, no matter what they're spewing? Is that your job? Okay, so I don't have that answer for you. I think we are all different in what we expect of ourselves. Nowadays, for me, I'm really not interested in any of that at all. But I know some people have more of a threshold for that, and I can respect that totally. Okay, so that is kind of a segue into this next part. When we're engaging in a conversation with someone, if the person is all riled up, when is that situation perhaps an opportunity for us to practice patience and holding space and groundedness and blah, blah, blah? When is it our role to hold space? But when is it our role to just step out and be like, that person is just like spewing, they're arguing just to argue. Maybe we're losing energy, like we're leaking energy because the person is sucking energy. That's not good. So when is it that the person is just acting out their unhealed wounds? There was a Facebook group that I used to hang out in, and Jill, I know I haven't been in it for a while, but I think you're in that one. I'm not going to name it because it's a negative story, and I don't want to give any negative slant to that group because I really like that group. But I was spending a lot of time in this one Facebook group, which was started by a certain author, and this was like over a year ago. And I had really positive experiences in the group. It really helped me a lot. But I also had several conversations where it was obvious to me that the people were spewing and acting out all of their inner pain. It was like they were just projectile vomiting it onto whoever. And when that would happen, I'm like, they're not, it's not just that they're not meeting me at my level. It's like they are so unconscious right now that they're just acting out all their pain. Whoever, like, you could just take me out and put another person in, and they wouldn't even notice. They would just keep spewing out, like they're just spewing it out onto whoever is sitting in the hot seat. And there were times when I would be like, hey, I'm not interested in helping someone work through their inner shadow. Like, unless you're in my program and like that's my job to do that with you. But in some random Facebook group, that's not my job to do that with a complete stranger. That's my boundary, right? I know I honor, we all have different perspectives on that. But we need to think about, when is it a practice for us, like a purposeful practice? The universe put this situation in front of us so that we could practice something, practice holding space, practice loving compassion, practice acceptance, practice listening. When is it that? And when is it just that this person is projectile vomiting their pain onto anybody who will receive it? That's not the best use of your energy. Your energy is getting, it's not just leaking, it's like gushing out. And your energy is important. You don't need to be letting other people source your energy like that. They can work through their pain body in other ways, but it doesn't need to be by projectile vomiting all that stuff onto you. Okay? All right, hopefully that makes sense. There's a little bit more that I'm going to cover, and then we'll be done. Perfect. There's a workshop that I've taught a few times, and it's called How to Set Boundaries Like a Boss. And I'm just going to go over just a couple of key points. And this is just so important. Boundaries. So this is a little bit different than communication, but it's like an offshoot, okay? Because when we don't communicate our boundaries clearly to someone else, and then we feel resentful and upset that they didn't meet our expectations, that we never told them what those were, then we're holding that person hostage. I mean, we've literally not communicated when we should have. So these are some very simple tips about boundary setting and expectation setting. And they seem really simple, but I want you to write this down. Number 1, get crystal clear on your expectations. Whatever it is, the situation, whatever. Your expectation of somebody, okay? Let's say you are beginning to engage in some kind of situation. I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say, I don't know. Let's say you're going to go on a road trip with somebody, and you have the expectation that they're going to pay for half the gas, but you never tell them about that expectation, and so maybe they're taking advantage of you, or maybe they're not, and they're thinking, wow, this person is so nice, they've gifted me this road trip, right? And so maybe you've made a whole bunch of assumptions, like maybe you're like assuming, oh, they're a moocher, they never paid me my half, they should have known. So you're making a whole bunch of assumptions, and you've avoided communicating what you really expected. And maybe you never even got clear about it in your own mind at the beginning, but it wasn't until afterwards that you thought about it and you decided to get mad. And then what's happening is you're holding that person hostage because they don't even know. Maybe you weren't even clear in your own mind what you expected. How would they know? So you have to get super clear, get clear on what your expectations are. If you're not clear on them, you have no right to get angry with the other person about it. That's a fact. So number one, get totally clear in your own mind of what your expectations are. Number two, communicate those expectations ahead of time, not 3 months later. It really made me mad when you didn't do blah, blah, blah. Well, that sucks that you're communicating that way. That's just not helpful at all. You got to get clear from the beginning and then communicate it to the person, and then you're good to go. Then there's a couple things that can happen. The person can agree to it, or they can not agree to it. Or if they are someone who isn't very good at honoring boundaries, they might break those boundaries. So you will also want to think of number three ahead of time. What happens if the boundaries are not honored? What do you do? Okay, do you have another conversation about it? That's fine. You can give them a second chance, have another conversation. Or are you like a one time and you're out kind of person? I think it depends on the scenario. For me, if it's somebody who's basically a stranger and we're on Facebook and I set a boundary and then they immediately break that boundary, I just block them. I'm just like, done. It's not my job to try to help you learn how to honor boundaries. But if it's someone that I have a relationship with, I don't do the one strike and you're out. You messed up, you're gone. Like, X. No, I don't do that. Like, I believe in having conversations. But the thing that a lot of people miss is the first step. You have to get really clear in your own mind. And a lot of times people are so mixed up and not grounded, they haven't taken the time to think about what they really want and what they really expect. But then they expect the other person to know and to be able to read their mind. And I have a funny story for you. I have at least one funny story for you. And I've told this many times. So I mentioned that I'm an empath and that I also have developed my psychic abilities. I'm not a mind reader. Like, I can't actually hear someone's thoughts while they're thinking them. I'm not a telepath, but I'm an empath and I can feel and pick up on a lot of stuff. And so if someone is not telling me something, I will feel things. That's just what happens. So this was like 10 years ago. I was visiting some people, and I was staying on their property, but I was visiting, I was having dinner with them. And the woman, now the context is that both the man and the woman had this belief that if you say what you really want, then it's rude. They were taught when they were young, and these were people that were 20 years older than me, so elders, right? But they were taught when they were young that asking for what you want is rude and you shouldn't do it. And they also believed that people should learn to pick up on cues. They had learned this in some kind of spiritual class somewhere, I think, a retreat, that you should learn how to pick up on cues. Well, the situation was that I went over for dinner, and then I had brought, I think it was some coconut milk ice cream or something natural, special treat for dessert. And all during dinner, the woman was saying how she was really excited because she had just given up sugar and she was going to be feeling so much better and blah, blah, blah. And so here I am thinking, oh, well, I brought that dessert. So here's what my thought process was. I want to be a good friend and support her in her new endeavor of giving up sugar. And so I'm just not going to tempt her, right? I'm going to just make myself a bowl, make her husband a bowl. And that's what my thought process was. Okay. Now, at the time, I was not as good at asking questions as I am now. And so I was having trouble navigating this relationship anyway, because it was like I preferred to be straightforward, but they never would be. They never would be straightforward. But I remember I was trying to feel like, well, what does she really want? Because she never will tell me, because we had already had that conversation before. She would not tell me what she would really want. I already knew that about her. So I'm trying to figure out, does she want me to offer her dessert, or will she get mad about that? Or, so as you can imagine, I still had a little bit of the walking on eggshells, people pleasing over 10 years ago. That was still something I was working through. So anyway, what happened was I went ahead and made a bowl for myself, made a bowl for her husband, and we're sitting there and eating. She sits there and folds her hands and says, someone who is more evolved would understand that you need to ask a person. It's at least polite to offer me dessert, because even if I was going to say no, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't win with this person, because if I had asked her, that would have been the wrong thing too. But also, what I realized, this really important thing in that moment, and it was that even as an empath and someone who could feel people's energies, what I was feeling about her was that she didn't know if she wanted it or not. She was totally unclear. If she had had a really clear frequency of, I really want it, I would have been able to feel that. But most of the time, and this is ever since that happened, I've been making these observations and noticing this, that 9 times out of 10, when someone doesn't speak up and clarify what it is that they want, they are also sending off mixed signals. I want it, I don't want it, I want it, I don't want it. And so even if you are a mind reader, even if you are a telepath, a telepath, even if you are a telepath, a mind reader, or if you're an empath, you're still going to get it wrong. And so that person can't. So anyway, the idea is that if you are someone who's not speaking up for what you want, and you're thinking that the other people around you should be able to figure it out, whether they're empaths or psychics or not, doesn't matter. If you're thinking, well, they should be able to figure it out, that approach is just going to bring you frustration. And it's going to make you disappointed and resentful in all the people around you, because I'm going to bet you that you're sending off mixed signals anyway. So even the best telepath or empath isn't going to be able to jump through your hoops and figure out what you want. So, and I see this happening a lot, even with friends and spiritual seekers, where they're not being clear. They're not getting clear in their own mind and in their own energy exactly what they expect, and then they're not communicating that to others, but then feeling resentful and shutting the person out because why? Right? Well, if you haven't gotten clear about your own expectations, and you haven't communicated that, it is your fault, not the other person's. Okay? But if you have gotten clear and you've communicated, and the person then just ignores the boundaries and does whatever they want, then you're going to need to think about whatever the consequences will be, like having a second conversation to re-clarify and find out where things are at. Was it just a mistake? Maybe they forgot, maybe they didn't understand the first time, so you can have a clarifying conversation. But then after that, if you get to the point where you can tell that they're just not interested in honoring boundaries, because there are people out there that I call boundary violators, who they don't honor boundaries. And I've actually met some people who are really rude boundary violators, like they're just total jerks. But I've also met a lot of people in the spiritual communities who are lovely people, but because they've been taught, whether through their spiritual practices or through their upbringing, they've been taught that like we are all one and therefore there's no need for boundaries. They end up being these really nice, lovely people who are major boundary violators, that when you express a boundary to them, it goes right over their head. It goes in through one ear and it just floats out the other ear. So if that's you, I'm saying this with kindness, I really am, to work on that. because it's not healthy to not set boundaries or honor boundaries. Okay. Do we have any questions as we finish up? So a couple things that pop into my mind just to recap: be brave enough to ask questions. Be brave enough to have those difficult conversations. If there's something that's upsetting you or there's something that's not right, if you care about that conversation continuing, then you do need to have a conversation. Okay? But if it's a relationship that you don't care about, like I mentioned, I have like 4,200 Facebook friends, many of whom I've never met. And so if there's somebody being really belligerent and rude, I don't feel the need to have a clearing, like a conscious clearing conversation with them. I'm like, okay, we're done. You know what I mean? So you have to think about, if this is a relationship that you intend to continue, then you have to have conscious conversations with them. Otherwise, eventually the relationship will disintegrate. It might happen quickly, it might take many years, but it will eventually disappear, you know, or it'll still be there, but it will be so degraded that it's not a healthy relationship at all. So if it's a relationship that you care about, you have to be brave enough to have those conversations. If it's a really distant relationship or a stranger, you're not responsible for having a conscious conversation with anybody like that, unless you feel like it was divinely guided for some reason. Then go for it. Okay, so it'll be up to your discernment. Jeannie says, extremely relevant and informative class, Maya. Thank you. You're very welcome. So what I said at the beginning is, I don't have all the answers, and I certainly don't get it right all the time. And I have a pain body just like everybody else. And the idea is that we keep practicing and we keep reminding ourselves what it is that we're consciously trying to do, and we give ourselves grace. We know that some days our best is better than other days, and we just do what we can. Shelley says, learning how to manage my empathic nature and my pain body is work. Yeah, so just a little bit at a time. Just give yourself patience, give yourself grace. A thought pops into my head, and that is a suggestion for all of us. If you happen to have one or a few relationships with people who are more in sync with you, those might be the people to begin practicing those conscious conversations with. Because having conscious conversations can be really hard. It is not an easy skill at all. So start with those people who are the most in sync with you, if you have any of those people. I know I haven't always had that. So if you do have anybody or anybody's, then start with them. And then as you develop that skill, then you will be able to have the more difficult conversations with people that maybe are not as in sync, or people that you don't know as well. Okay. All right. I think we're all done. There's more that I could say, but I think we'll leave it there because we've gone over an hour. I truly hope that this was helpful to everybody. And if you think of any other questions, let me know. Just an FYI, I noticed with the Facebook Lives, if you post a comment or another question for me, I love it when we have a lot of comments in here, but for some reason with Facebook Lives, when I try to go back and look at the question, like Facebook, it's like buried under all the other questions. So if there's a question that you want to ask me in this instance, go ahead and just send me a message or create a new post or something. We can start another conversation about it. So I just wanted to mention that because sometimes people will ask me questions and I don't even see it for a whole week after they posted it. So this was a great conversation, very potent, very important. So we're all practicing every day, just practicing and giving ourselves grace and giving other people grace and recognizing that it's not a competition. It's not like all those lower level unevolved people are. No, we gotta be humble. Also, we need to think about just, are people gonna match our wavelength or not? Can we communicate with them? When we can't, we just let it go. Just let it go. Just give them grace, give them forgiveness, give yourself forgiveness. Do your best. Always do your best. Thanks, everybody. See you next month. I think there were some requests on what to cover next month. I need to remember what that was. But I'll see you guys next month. Remember, we have a Facebook Live in here in this group, Spiritual Empowerment Community Facebook group, every third Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific and 6 p.m. Central. See you next time. Bye.